I'm Don Holden of the Art Students League of New York. You're now going to see Robert Beverly Hale's lecture number 6 on the shoulder girdle, a continuation of lecture number 5.
Well, today we continue with the shoulder girdle. Afraid you won't be able to see. Maybe somebody help me move this whole thing back. Get the stairs back, because otherwise they just can't see. And put the stairs in front. That's fine. Thank you so much. I think, as you know now, the skeletal shoulder girdle consists of the collarbone, the shoulder blade. I always feel for the artist it consists part of the arm, though that's not medical at all. But the artist thinks of the shoulder girdle as so much a part of the arm that I feel that that's sort of shoulder girdle too, you know. Last time we discussed various muscles, but we didn't exhaust the subject of the shoulder girdle, but I believe we can exhaust it tonight. There are two muscles that come off the shoulder blade from this upper triangle here and this lower triangle here. And they're named after those triangles, really. They're named for their places above the spine. You see, that's the spine. There's the supraspinatus, that's above the spine, and infraspinatus is below the spine. And frankly, the average student thinks that infraspinatus is the shoulder blade. It's the bulge he sees. But we'll think of these matters a bit. We could draw a shoulder blade by thinking of the spine of the shoulder blade. I like to think of that spine as the part that is right under the skin, which of course is a spiral plane, you see. It starts off pointing that way and ends up pointing this way. So it's a little spiral plane with its details, to be sure. It has a down plane underneath it, which attaches it to the body of the shoulder blade. But in here is the cavity, which looks up slightly. And let's see what else we have. The body of the shoulder blade itself. Last time I think we shaded this down plane here, and I carried on quite a tirade about the understanding of cast shadows. Beginners get all mixed up about cast shadows, and the reason is clear that it's a highly intellectual business. If you know, dive into the history of art a bit and begin to examine them. How many have you seen in Egyptian art? How many have you seen in Byzantine art? How many have you seen in medieval art? They seem to get on very well without them, you know. Well, we examine them and we use them according to our taste. We're not as custom bound as the Egyptians, perhaps, or the medieval people, or even the Byzantines. And I pointed out, if I put a big shadow here, you couldn't see where that plane met this one, you see, even though I might well see it if I looked at the model. But I think I ought to tell the beginners half the battle of drawing illusionary art, which is what we're up to, is, of course, to analyze what you see and think of what sort of an illusion you will produce if you draw what you see, you know? That's the real secret. Well, I drew a left shoulder blade. Let's come down on the right arm. I think it'll be wiser in the end. Something like that. Now, the bone fits in there. I put the cavity too low. The bone fits in there, and the bone it represents here the articulation represents a ball and socket joint. That means you can move the arm any way you wish. Here's another one down here, which is designed really for supporting the body. This is a very weak joint, actually, and some of you have probably thrown it out. It's a very common occurrence, in which case the doctor puts you on the ground, and puts his foot in your elbow, and he pulls on the bone and snaps it back. Much harder to dislocate this one here, you know. Well, since we know it's a ball and socket, we know that the shape of the bone on top must include a ball, which indeed it does. But it doesn't include this beautiful neck we have here. And that's there for functional purposes. You see, there's a great muscle that comes off there and goes into there and pulls the leg out. And the neck is there to give that muscle leverage. The arm, as most of you know, is raised by the deltoid, which goes into here. So it doesn't need any neck, so we don't have any neck here. We have what doctors call the surgical neck, but it's nothing but a line around the edge of the ball. Now, the bone goes in there, and artists like to think that the bone falls 2 shoulder blade lengths, which is a pretty good idea, because you can relate it to the pelvis, and you can say that the pelvic bone here falls, I mean this female falls 2 pelvic lengths. It's always a good thing to relate the pelvic girdle to the shoulder girdle if you can, and find the analogies. That gluteus maximus I was just talking about, of course, is analogous to the deltoid up here. Well, having drawn the bone that way, I think I'll throw it out a little so that we can see the muscles I'm about to describe more clearly. Just about 2 shoulder blade lengths. Then we get down here to the end of the bone, a little further, isn't it? And we find a couple of remarkable landmarks that artists try to remember. These 2 bumps on the bottom here, they're called the condyles. And you can always feel them on yourself, and you can always see the inner one on the model. If you can't see the inner one on the model, you can put your arm in the same position and feel your own, because it's very palpable, the inner condyle, and a great landmark for us. One of the reasons artists are so excited about these 2 condyles, if they can place them. They can place the amount of rotation the bone has undergone. That means the amount of rotation the upper arm has undergone. And you see, they have to know that, or frankly, they couldn't draw a line on the upper arm. So you can't draw a line on anything unless you know where it is. Well, as I said, there was this muscle above here called supraspinatus. It goes into the bump on the top there and pulls the bone out. It's not usually taught to art students for some odd reason, but I think we should know about it. All these things will be in your books. Now, growing out of here underneath and going into here is quite a big muscle called infraspinatus, like that. The fibers run that way. And that maybe rotates the arm a little and pulls it in. It has a companion muscle called teres minor. Teres means round. And until about the middle of the 16th century, the anatomists really didn't distinguish between those two muscles. And as artists, I don't think we should either. I think we should combine the two together in a group and call it the infraspinatus group. You see, artist anatomy does not have to be modern. That is, it doesn't have to be modern than Vesalius, who wrote in 1540, was it? About that time, yes, about that time. We're not concerned with microscopic anatomy. Now, coming out of the bottom of this thing, and going in about here, is another round muscle, which is called teres major. It actually creates part of the back flap of the armpit, and therefore is very visible at times. You can see what it does. It would pull the bone in, and it would rotate it this way. We then come to the very biggest muscle of the whole body, this great thing in the back here, which is called latissimus dorsi. Goes into the arm and into the pelvis. It's covered by the tail of the trapezes that I drew last time. And its function largely is to pull down the arm. It starts way up here on the other side there, and it comes down in a tendon. And the tendon comes down, makes a sort of a sling. Makes a sort of a sling, and that seems to hold the other muscle which goes through there, you see. And that's why, and that creates the back flap of the armpit too. And that's why the line of the back flap of the armpit is always a little double line like that. Because first it's teres major and then it's latissimus dorsi. Well, it's an enormous muscle, and it grows way down here to the pelvic crest, and it covers all this business here and goes to the center of the back. But I was going to put it in on a big chart in which I could include all the muscles of the back and really make a drawing of the back as a whole as the anatomy books show it to you. Then I thought I'd go on and more or less explain the way the artist sees that chart. So we could draw a back view of the skeleton and feel the ball in the back of the head, I think, is a wonderful proportional conception for beginners. You could even block it up if you wished. Now, that's not a circle and a square. That is a sphere and a cube. If we double that, we get to the pit of the neck. And even though we're doing the back, of course, as artists, we can see right through to the pit of the neck. There's a lot of training there, you know. If you're drawing the front of the model, you want to train yourself in figure drawing. Go after the landmarks. You can just touch them as points, you know, with the tip of your pencil. That's all you have to do, if you decide with yourself exactly where the point might be. I mean, this anterior superior iliac spine is pretty big. And I would decide with myself, take my point on the outside lower part of it, you see. But you could proceed your figure, you see, with these landmark points. Now, for training purposes, it's a very good thing to look through the body and put in landmarks in the back. It helps you to see through, you see. You've got another triangle back here. And you just might, when you're doing the front, you might just put that in the back. Might teach you a little perspective at the same time, for all you know. And that's, I think, important to the training of artists. I find from long experience I can't get my students to draw construction lines of any sort because they feel they mess up their beautiful drawings. But construction lines are one of the great ways to learn how to draw. But I seem to be able to persuade quite a number of them to put in points, you see, which help too. But you ought to really use both when you're training. This is the construction line here. So is that. This might be 1, 2. Now, as you remember, if we put 4 of those cubes down here, we get a nice perspective box for the skeletal rib cage. Must be about like that. There are 4 of them, you see. And then we can put the same thing down here and get a perspective box for the skeletal pelvis. You see, in drawing, we have to have some sort of a secret figure in our mind that we feel is normal. Otherwise, we cannot gauge the abnormalities on the model. I'm offering you one, which is quite simple. You don't have to take it. You can make up your own, because nobody knows what the normal is. But you have to realize, whatever the normal is, you have to base it on the skeleton. You see, the flesh varies so much that nobody can possibly tell you what a normal flesh figure is. But the skeletons are remarkably alike in their proportions. I don't quite understand it. It's a mysterious thing, but the celestial engineers designed the skeleton to perform all manner of human tasks, no matter what they were. And so skeletons seem to come out alike. And you'd find that the skeleton of a Roman soldier was exactly like, in proportions, the skeleton of that astronaut who went to the moon. And is probably exactly like the people who will live in the future. But the flesh, you see, varies with the environment, with the will, with the appetite, with what you do. You must say the flesh of a watchmaker is very different from the flesh of a weightlifter, don't you see? The flesh varies. There are things we know about it, and that is that the muscles start at fixed points on the rigid skeleton, and they end at fixed points. And the skeleton frequently shapes the muscles. But at times, of course, there are layers of fat that obscure the facts that the muscles might create. But we can study those too if we wish and recognize them easily, especially in Richet's anatomy. So basically, your secret figure is really a skeleton, though you would easily turn it into a flesh figure without any trouble. So the study of the skeleton in relation to proportions is extremely important. And from my point of view, the only landmarks are skeletal landmarks. I don't trust the flesh. Never have. For good reason, too. There is an imaginary circle here, a constructional circle, which is a reflection of the first ribs. We can draw a rib cage, maybe, if we can see through the body and see the bottom of the ensiform cartilage and realize that's where the rib cage will be widest on the front view. About there, you see. We may not know exactly how wide the rib cage is. If we're drawing a woman's pelvis, we can accept this width, which frankly is the extent of the collarbones. The extent of the collarbones. We can accept that width as her pelvic width. If we're drawing a man, we will have to accept the width of the rib cage as the pelvic width. That's sexually, of course, that's the great differentiation between the male and the female. It's the relationship between rib cage and pelvis. On the female, the pelvis is as broad as this. On the male, it is no broader than the rib cage. Of course, there are always extremes, you know. I mean variations. Some of us males approach the female, some of us females approach the male, but that's the general rule. Now, we could say that on the female, the sacrum here is 1/3 this distance. It seems wider than it does on the male, because on the male it would be 1/3 the distance from here to there, the width of the pelvis, you see. The thing is, these differences, these sexual differences, seem to do with widths, not with heights. The heights remain very constant, but the widths are quite obviously different on the female pelvis. We get the high point here and the wide point there, and we can get a pretty good pelvic crest. And I guess we have to, because we're going to draw latissimus dorsi, that famous muscle. Now, you can start the shoulder blade outside of this. Oh, I think the line of the angle of the ribs is known to artists. It just follows the other line to a great extent. If you wish to continue it down to the triangle, it's a good idea, because you will then limit the extent of these strong cords that hold people upright and are very human and might be stressed, you know. That's one of the reasons people study comparative anatomy. That means the anatomy of animals in relation to man. Because then you see what muscles we have that are very different from the beasts. And since we like to give human beings a human quality, we're very liable to stress those. That started early, you know, in the time of, say, Signorelli. Look at his pictures and see how the strong cords are stressed. He knew they were essentially human. I must have people here who ride about on horses, you know. For some odd reason, a lot of people do that. And I must have people here who own cows. Well, take a good look at them. Do you ever see these strong cords on each side of the horse's back? Or these up here? Of course you don't. Those are human. And they can be stressed. Of course, another thing we do with muscles when we're coming to some shape conception of a muscular group is that we may characterize it just a touch to make it look more like itself than it looks. I mean, if you thoroughly understand the function of, say, the external oblique, as the artists call it here, if you thoroughly understand the function, and if you thoroughly understand the two muscles, the function of the two muscles beneath this group here, maybe you could make the group look more like themselves than they really look on the model, and make the model look a little more human. But that's fairly advanced draftsmanship, I suppose. But then I have fairly advanced people here, you know. This is a very mixed group, artistically speaking. Beginners, professionals. I recognize several professionals in this audience tonight, and I bow to them. Well, the shoulder blade, we could start here, and to our delight, we'll find that when it's at rest, it lies against the line of the angle of the ribs. So it's pretty easy to draw. We could also pretty well guess that it'll come to that point. Then I think there'd be one on the other side. There's the glenoid cavity, they call it. Just means shallow, that's all it means. Well, we might review a bit. Last time, you remember we threw in these little muscles here that go around to the front, like so many fingers. They keep on going up here too, but the artists don't seem to study them up there. They pull the shoulder blade around that way. They're called serratus magnus, or sometimes anterior serratus. They're these things here that these students mistake as ribs. They're really fingers of muscle to pull the shoulder blade forward. Frankly, they're a muscle group, and There are 5 of them that we use. This bottom line frequently comes through all the other muscles and shows and gives evidence of the group and is used by artists. Now, if we put a bone in here, we could throw it out a bit. It'll be about as long as the shoulder, as the rib cage, you know, is another idea they have. The distance between the condyles is very important. I think on the average it's about 1/3 of this distance across here. The reason it's important is it has a lot to do with proportion. You see, that distance there between the condyles is just about the same as this distance here on the end of the metacarpals. This might be a touch bigger. But in the beginning, people make the hands enormous. And, well, they're just not, that's all. I think we'll see that, well, all you have to do is remember when you were a baby, you could put your hand in your mouth. You practically still could if you'd only do a little yoga. And you'd be much surprised at the relationship between the size of the mouth and the size of the hand. Don't make these great big hands that beginners make, or these great big feet, you know. Relate them to the condyles. About 1/3 of the head width, perhaps a little more, not much. So that distance is an important distance. Well, we drew this muscle up here, old supraspinatus, and then underneath this big bulge here, which is infraspinatus, and its little boyfriend, teres major. But we lump them all together. We group them, as artists say. I don't think you ever see teres major separately. Naturally, the same on the other side. Now, there is quite a measurement trick here. You could cut the arm in 2. That's where the deltoid goes, we'll find. And then you can cut that in 2, and that's where pectoralis goes on the other side. And then you can sort of halve those places. And I just know from that idea that I can take teres major out of there, you see. You see, all I did was this. You see, learning the origin and the insertion of muscles is important because if we draw a line, we want to know where the line starts and where it ends. And we want to know this before we draw it. If we can visualize and feel our skeleton, of course, almost every line starts where the muscle starts and ends where the muscle ends, you see. About 3/4, 5/8 of the lines we draw are that type of line. So we put quite a little study into the points of origin and insertion of muscles. Latissimus dorsi that we were talking about starts on the other side there and comes down, and we go up to the high point of the pelvic crest here, and we find that it goes just a touch to the outside of the high point and ends up in quite a dramatic little tendon, rather short. It then begins to cross over the forms here, one after the other, and goes to the center, you see. It has what they call the line of the implantation of the fibers. Maybe that's a new term. But the actual fibers of the muscle, which cover everything underneath there, the fibers, you see, all run this way. And they start at the line of the implantation of the fibers. And that's a very recognized type of line in anatomy. It's that line there. Now we can see that the back flap of the arm is teres major and latissimus dorsi. Well, to continue the lecture last time, you might say, we talked about the multiple muscles that really create two strong chords. They're groups. You can't memorize them very easily. I suppose you could if you wanted to. You don't have to. You think of two great chords here on each side of the center line of the neck. I think the ambitious might study splenius capitis because it's so important in animals, or perhaps splenius cervicus goes a little lower. We talked about the rhomboids, which came from the center line. They too would have a line of incision of the fibers if we really studied it. And that's why we often have such a hollow in the back, you know, and back down here, because of all these muscles and their lines of the incision of the fiber. Notice that the rhomboid ends here, and clever artists, when they draw this line here, send it over the bottom of the scapula, and then over the rhomboid, and then into its incision near the backbone there. Well, everything's the same on the other side. So I'm trying to get my high point because I want to find out where the darn thing is going. I say it goes to the inside of the high point. Inside of the high point. Teres major, latissimus. This line here is quite a famous line, though it's more obvious on the side view. You see, latissimus dorsi is this enormous muscle, the front of which is this here, you see. That line there, you know, is very famous. It's a spiral around the body, and is drawn by artists again and again and again. It's the anterior edge of latissimus dorsi, of course. Well, of course, up here we have covering a lot of these things, covering the rhomboid, covering little odd muscle we might learn if we wanted to, the lifter of the angle of the scapula, though I never think is of much importance. We have the trapezius. As I suggested, a good way to get it, just feel a rhythm from shoulder point to shoulder point. And start the trapezius, which is quite narrow, and bring it down and lay it on the rhythm, you see, as they say in musical circles. Now, the trapezius covers everything, but we try to remember these things underneath, because they play their part in the creation of shape. It covers everything, and it grows into the spine of the scapula in quite a beautiful pattern here that some people remember, which is beautifully illustrated in Rimmer's anatomy. It's called the butterfly wing for some reason. Now, the trapezius, as I said, has a beautiful tail, which starts here and runs over every form underneath in the hands of a skillful artist. It goes over latissimus dorsi, and according to the latest textbooks, ends on the 12th dorsal, which is there. It's used, you see, to explain the form underneath, the form over which it runs. You see, it even runs over the line of the insertion of the fibers of latissimus dorsi. It has its own little details that artists seem to know. The seventh cervical dorsal spine is about here. And the line of insertion of the fiber spreads out and makes a long lozenge shape, which is lower on the bottom than on top. And it creates a famous dimple here because it has no flesh there. And that dimple artists note, because if they can catch that in the spine of the shoulder blade, the point, you see, then they know where the spine is, and then they know where the shoulder blade is. there's another on strong men, there's another lozenge down here, which is the line of insertion of the fibers again. If we continue this chart, which is getting to look suspiciously like the one in the books, you can probably see, we'll find that these great strong muscles of the back, they too have their line of the insertion of the fiber. That's the muscle that goes up and sends fingers into the angles of the rib, helps you stand erect. And here's the one, that's called iliocostalis. Here's one called longissimus dorsi, that sends fingers into all the transverse processes. And here's the final one, spinalis dorsi. And that lies in the in this hollow here between the dorsal spines and the transverse. Any of you eaten any lamb chops lately? No, you could find out a lot about anatomy by just noticing what you're eating, you see. Weren't you perhaps eating spinalis dorsi the last time you ate a lamb chop? Very probable, you know. Especially, too, in your dissection of birds. Goes on so much in the kitchen. You can learn a lot of anatomy, as I think I pointed out last time. Cannibals know a great deal about human anatomy. That's why they are so amazed in those French caves. The figures are drawn very badly. The animals are drawn beautifully, and from that they surmise that those magnificent Cro-Magnons who painted those pictures were not cannibals, you see. Well, I think what I'm trying to point out, which I think I pointed out before, was that students often see an upside-down triangle. Now, the great trouble with that particular indication there is you never know how high or how low it'll be. It can be much lower. It depends a lot on whether people are long-muscled or short-muscled. Might be down here. It's a triangle that seems to reflect the sacrum. And with beginners, they often choose this and draw it rather than that one, which is 30 times more important. Because the triangle of the sacrum, of course, betrays immediately the whole position of the pelvis, you see. That is a very important thing to draw. I've probably told you about the difference between long muscles and short muscles, but let's go back into it because it's quite important. There are two muscles they might be like muscles in the arm, the biceps a good deal. Here the belly is very long. That's what they call long muscled. Here the belly is very short. That's what they call short muscles. Everybody is either one or the other or in between. And after you've drawn a good deal, you know exactly which type you're using and drawing. If this line is very low, it means that they're long muscled. If the line is very high, it means they're short muscled. Because you see some muscles like these back muscles, like latissimus dorsi, that comes down and it goes into a great piece of aponeurosis or flat tendon, you see, and we get this big line here, the line of insertion of the fibers, which is this line here, which will even show up under the trapezius there, the tail of the trapezius. Well, I think those are the facts that artists know about the back, but I think that I will draw another chart and point out more or less the way the artist considers these facts. He doesn't think so much about these lines that I've been drawing, these edge lines, as he does about the masses that the muscles create. So it looks like time for a recess, and I'll come back and do that. I thought now we might take this chart apart and explain it a little more the way the artist sees it, in terms of planes, perhaps, and masses. In the first place, this is inevitably thought of as the shape of a ball here. And even when an artist draws the hair over that part of the head, he tries to retain the illusion of the ball beneath. We can use approximately the same proportions, I guess. And the ball would be about here. Of course, if you play a lot with light and shade, you soon come to the conclusion that you get your best illusion with two lights. And that's because I think that that's the way the world was lit from the beginning, and that it's deep in our subconscious. The center line is that, I suppose, in our mind, if we draw that line, which we draw on a direct back view, we ought to try to consider what we're drawing. Either we're drawing a line that is caressing the dorsal spines, or we're drawing perhaps the line of gravity that passes through the body like a spear. But those two lines are very different. But we ourselves as artists ought to know which we're drawing. It's possible, if we're actually drawing this line here that I'm touching, we would darken up on the down planes and lighten up on the up planes. Artists don't like the straight back view on account of that line, because it carries no shape, you see. A straight line carries no shape except flat. And an artist would much rather turn the body just a little, put the ball here, and tell you just something about that shape, you see. He'd much rather do that. Because in illusionary drawing, his terrible problem is to get these shapes to stick out of the flat surface. And it takes all kinds of methods to do that, you see. Certainly this part of the body and the neck, the two strong chords, which are so clear on the side view, these two strong chords are essentially very human, and they hold the head erect, you see. As I said, you won't see them on your horse. Neither on your horse will you see trapezius going up to here. On the horse, trapezius will stop there. The points of the shoulder blade and the spines of the shoulder blade are much used by artists as construction lines. You see, if I'm drawing a little, there seems to be sort of a little 3/4 figure here. Artists, I drew that all wrong. I want to bring it down this way. Artists love these lines there. You see, that gives you the whole feel of where the shoulder blade is. And it is a construction line that shows this. And at once, on these back views, you could throw the trapezius into it, don't you see? Here's a girl, I guess, or a man with his arms partly raised, probably, you see. And those are construction lines. It would be raised more than that with that tilt, I can see that. We'll talk about that a little later. Probably about like that. So very often you draw the spines of the shoulder blade as a construction line. Now, if I draw them here in the same position, they'd be about like this, I suppose. And one on the other side. These are the positions of shoulder blades at rest. Even though I put the arm out a little, it wouldn't affect the shoulder blade. The rotation of the shoulder blade really isn't affected until the arm gets almost horizontal, as we'll see. And we bring the trapezius down and we plant it into the spine of the shoulder blade. Those little points there are called the points of the shoulder, and are, of course, the end of the spines, you see. The Chromian process, the doctors call them. But now we can isolate a couple of things. These strong underlying chords which absolutely dominate the surface And this triangle here, which is called the supraspinatus triangle, the thing about it is we never know where it will be. You can see if I pull my shoulder blade way around, it would be here. If I put it back, it would be back here. If I put it up like this, it would be in another place. But it is an element that we regard separately. We could put letters on these things if you wanted. Those are what the artists call the strong chords. This is the supraspinatus triangle. These things, I don't know what to call them, they're sort of bumps. Now, under that is the infraspinatus mass, I suppose, is a good high-sounding word, which consists of the supraspinatus muscle and its companion, teres major. It's what almost all beginners think is the shoulder blade. They don't realize the shoulder blade goes up there and down here too. Now, underneath here, you may remember the rhomboids. And if the shoulder blade approaches the center line, you get a very prominent bulge here, which artists call the rhomboid bulge. It frequently has a wrinkle in it, or two, vertical ones. If, however, the shoulder blade is pulled way around the body, and you know you can't pull it way around, that bulge disappears, and you're very liable to see the line of the angle of the ribs underneath. That would be this line here. Now, artists often think of this part of the body and that part of the body as if they were a couple of watermelons, melon shapes. Sorry. They've got good reason for that. The lungs underneath here are melon-shaped. The ribs intensify that shape. And then the meat of latissimus dorsi, this great muscle in the back, further intensifies it. So that frequently in artists, when they're drawing backs, they come down here, and they just put a melon on this side and a melon on the other side, you see. And they can shade them as such if they wish. It'll work very well. Oh, you'll see Blake doing that. Wasn't it Blake that made that beautiful picture of the return of Ulysses? And it's taken from the back. And Ulysses is shooting all the suitors, you know, that took over his wife while he was away on business, on a business trip. And you'll see those watermelons on Ulysses' back. Then after he'd shot all the suitors with his arrows, you know, they were defenseless. You know what he did? He called all the maids who had taken care of his wife, and he got a piece of clothesline, he put it around the neck of each one of them, and he strung them all up too for, you know, conspiracy. I never thought that was quite fair. So underneath here, I can get the feel of a couple of watermelons. And I think you know now about what they are. One thing to remember is that the feel of them are lower than the rib cage. The feel of those watermelons comes almost down to here due to the meat of latissimus dorsi. And it's one of the things that makes the back seem lower there than the bulging of the cartilages in front. Well, I suppose it'd be another rhomboid in here. If we're going after our letters, we can call that C. That's infraspinatus. We can call the rhomboid D, and we might call the watermelon E. There's a method in my madness here. I'm using the alphabet, and I'm doing it perhaps to encourage you, because I know if you do the whole body, taking out the principal masses that artists use, you will just exhaust the letters of the alphabet, and that's all. There are about 26 they go after. Now, right under here there's a bump. And what it is, of course, is the bottom, or the inferior angle of the shoulder blade. You see, Latissimus dorsi cuts across here quite sharply, you'll see. And there's a little bump there that artists know, and they know that's the bottom of the shoulder blade. Shoulder blade looks to a beginner as if it stopped there, but it's due to this binding action of Latissimus dorsi. Actually, Latissimus dorsi holds the shoulder blade against the rib cage. At times, the shoulder blade jumps out, and those of you who frequent beaches where laborers who do heavy things like moving and such go will often see the shoulder blade has jumped out of the embrace of Latissimus dorsi and sticks out very brutally. Hardly happens to white-collar workers. Well, I suppose we could put a sacrum here. That's certainly one of the elements of the body, a triangle. And we might feel a pelvic crest traveling around. And we might think of this detail here. You know, it's pretty dull flesh in through here. That is the bottom finger of the serratus anterior of the great serratus. It often shows through there, just a touch. Details such as this we won't bother with, or the edge line of the trapezius. Now, the strong chords here become very apparent again. You never know how high they'll go. It will depend on the strength of your model. But they intermingle with those watermelons quite evidently. At times they overpower them. But you don't quite know which will be which. To go into our past anatomy, I think some of you know what that is. Look at it go just a little to the outside of the high point. That, of course, is what artists call the external oblique, and doctors obliquus externus. And I think we could put a letter on it. How are we coming on these letters? A, B, C, D, E. We could call that F. And we can call the strong chords G, and the sacrum H. H for sacrum. Now, to recapitulate and review a bit, here's a great landmark here. That, of course, is the great trochanter, or the head of the thigh bone, you see. We have to be wary of that landmark because it moves a great deal. You can see that if you happen to cross your legs, it would point downward like that. And as you move your leg here and there in the other place, suppose you do that, you see, it's not a very stable landmark. But whatever it does, it will pull with it gluteus medius, you see. Which to me is a sort of a spherical triangular plane. We then, of course, have the great buttocks. And they come down here and seek their insertion in the leg bone. From the muscular point of view, they're about like that. But everybody has fat here who's at all well-nourished. And they get squared up, as I guess I told you. Now, what we see in front here is the tensor muscle, which would be coming, can you feel your front point about there? It would be coming from the pelvic crest there, you see, and will take over the outline. And on a man is the widest point. widest part of the body. So a Cowdor line would run over gluteus maximus here and would pretty much run over the great trochanter and then would run over the tensor, which is way in the front. You see, people are very wide at the front here on account of this tensor muscle, which is an absolutely unknown entity to the layman and the beginner, because nobody talks about it at dinner parties. You see, this thing here. See, we really only know about this body what we've heard about, and we've really heard very little as laymen. But it seems to me in order to draw it well, at least you ought to know what you're drawing when you're drawing it. And now we can see when we come down the body, we're drawing really rib cage and then external oblique, and then gluteus medius and the tensor muscle. We could continue and come down the thigh here, and we would find, of course, that there would be an imaginary line here where the hamstring group hit the adductor group, but that usually there's so much fat there that you never see it. That should be an artist's line, the line between the functions. But this line here we'll see very, very clearly. That's the line between the quadriceps and the hamstring. So if we continue with our lettering, which I guess we got to H, we could call gluteus medius I. We could call gluteus maximus J. And we could call the tensor muscle, which I haven't isolated. Oh, we wouldn't see very much on the front. The tensor muscle K. Oh, yes, we'd see a good deal. We'd see more than that. K. It's great fun to try to put these letters over the form for practice in drawing. The way for practice in drawing, if you're a beginner, it would certainly be a terribly wise thing to do to put letters on this, how would an A look, say, up here? It would look that way, you know? Why not put A's all over a sphere? And why not put them all over a column? Because that will teach you how to draw, because drawing has to do, as you probably know, with running lines over conceived form. Well, we call the hamstring K, the adductor group JKL, and so on. And perhaps before we finish these lectures, we'll do the whole body and put the letters on. I think just for, well, I don't know. It's hard to go much further now unless we go into the arm, which we will do a little this time and a lot next time. The arm, of course, is made up of these bones here. This is called the humerus. And most laymen remember it because this is a funny bone, you know. They call that the funny bone. You hit that, and it makes the ulnar nerve tingle. Children know all about that. That's the inner condyle for us. And then we come down here to these two bones here, which are called the ulna and the radius. The ulna has a hinge joint here, and all the ulna can do all through life is just that, you see. But the radius is hollowed out on the top and pushed up against a ball-shaped thing here. And the radius rotates. And as it rotates, it carries the hand with it. So that when an artist thinks about the hand, he thinks of the hand as attached to the radius, which is true. The articulation here is really the radius against the hand. The hand itself is created by this package of bones here we call the carpus. These next bones, which are called the metacarpals. You see how much it's like the foot? and finally the fingers and the, which are called the phalanges. I don't believe, unless you can visualize these bones here, that you can ever draw this sort of thing, you see. You see, when the hand is this way, the doctors call it supination. When the hand is that way, they call it pronation. All medical students and all art students remember that term, because you can hold a bowl of soup that way, but you cannot hold a bowl of soup that way. So that's supination, you see, like that. The arm can be raised to a considerable extent without disturbing the shoulder blade. You can't pull it forward without disturbing the shoulder blade, but you can raise it almost to the vertical, but not quite, because when you get to the vertical, this bump here, called the greater tuberosity, engages the spine of the shoulder blade, and the two down, they lock. So therefore, if you put the arm up any higher, and I can't move it here because the shoulder blade is riveted to the body, if you put the arm up any higher, the shoulder blade has to rotate. So always stop and think a second if the arm is above the horizontal, because it means that rotation of the shoulder blade is taking place. The length of this thing here is supposed to be 2 of those head widths. If you take 2 more, the authorities disagree a good deal, but I take it to here, though I was reading a book today which said you should take it to here. But since there isn't any normal, who knows, you know? It's important to know that the only articulation between the shoulder girdle and the bone of the rib cage is here. And I know I've told you that we can raise this shoulder girdle by raising the collarbone, which in turn will raise the shoulder blade. We can pull the collarbone forward, which of course will drag the shoulder blade forward. And we can, of course, force the collarbone backward, which would force the shoulder blades a little closer to the center line of the back. Well, there's a vast amount of logic and technology, but as usual, I suppose we ought to realize that learning is logical, but it's very possible that our utterance is poetical. So I was going to talk a little about that picture in the Louvre in Paris, the girl with the smile, sort of half smile and the folded hands, it's so famous, and about the artist who made it, how he he went to that place outside of Florence in the Tuscan hills to paint that girl, and he put her out on the balcony, and he got inside, and of course he knew all about perspective, and he had a window, you see. She was out on the balcony, and he thought, well, I'll use my window as a picture plane. You see, all perspective is that you have a window, and you draw on the window exactly what you see. That is, assuming you keep your head very still and see with one eye. And so he had the window there, and there she was sitting there with the Tuscan hills behind her, which would hardly be the case here, because if the League wasn't here or the rest of New York, we'd just see the Pocono Mountains, but he had the Tuscan hills, you know. And he tried to decide where he'd put her in relation to the window, and you know, and he got it just about right. And then he thought, well, how much shall I put in? And he got quite near to it, and then all of a sudden he saw a dreadful-looking mother-in-law sitting next to her. You see, he didn't want her in the picture. She had probably a wart on her nose or something, so he pulled back right away, and finally he got it beautifully framed, you see, right here. And he accepted that. And he established what he established a point, you see, which is what we do in illusionary drawing. Just a point from which he saw everything. And he held that absolutely still. In fact, his whole visual consciousness was in that point. And once he'd established that, he could move all around as long as he remembered where that point was and kept his visual consciousness there. Then he set up his easel and his palette and his paints and everything. But then, of course, he realized that there's a lot more to being an artist than just the technical side, and that he had to say something in this picture. And there are many reports about what he thought, because he talked to people about it. And it is said that he stood here, you see, and he looked at that girl, and he said, "This is the head to which all the ends of the world have come, and the eyelids are a little weary. It is a beauty wrought out from within upon the flesh, the deposit little cell by cell of strange thoughts, fantastic reveries, and exotic emotions. She is older than the rocks upon which she sits. Like the vampire, she has been dead many times and knows the secrets of the grave. She has been a diver in deep seas and holds their fallen day about her. Like Leda, she was the mother of Helen of Troy, and like Anne, the mother of Mary. And all this has been to her but as the sound of lutes and lyres, and lives only in the delicacy that has molded the changing lineaments and tinged the eyelids and the hands." Thank you.
You've just seen Robert Beverly Hale's lecture number 6 on the shoulder girdle, one of his series of 10 lectures on figure drawing and artistic anatomy. We hope you'll join us for the next lecture in the series, lecture number 7 on the arm. This is Don Holden of the Art Students League of New York.